Time now for perspective, and it's time to check in on how things are looking for President Macron and his long-standing far-right rival Marine Le Pen ahead of the final round of the French presidential election on Sunday. I'm joined by French history expert Andrew Smith from Chichester University, a regular guest throughout this election period. It's good to have you with us once again, Andrew. Now, it's certainly full steam ahead on the campaign trail for both Macron and Le Pen. Just how close is this race at this point?
Well, I think the really important thing is that, we are now into the second round. It is now a binary choice. And as much polling as we can do, as much as we can look at the latest polling figures, it ultimately will come down to a choice on the day between these two figures. This has been a big thing that's been emerging around this neither Macron nor Le Pen movement. Of course, the big political idea has been around tripolarization, and we've got the French electorate roughly split into three, partially around Macron, partially around the kind of far right, and then partially around the left. And it's that idea of where those left votes are going to go, which is really up in the air. Now, of course, recent IFOP polling has put Emmanuel Macron about 53.5% and Marine Le Pen on about 46.5%. That's quite a tight poll. Others have a much larger distance. The Ipsos poll of polls is about 56 to 44 between Macron and Le Pen. So it looks like Macron's lead is perhaps extending, as captured by the opinion polls. But I think it's really important to note that so much is going to come down to this, of course, upcoming debate that we have on Wednesday.
Now, you mentioned just there the some 7 million voters who voted for Jean-Luc Mélenchon of the far left in the first round of voting. He told his supporters not to give a single vote to Marine Le Pen. He did not openly endorse Macron very pointedly. Do we have any idea what his voters are going to be doing on Sunday?
It's a challenging one. All of the polling before the second round suggested that there might be really, again, a kind of one-third split each way, one-third going to Macron, one-third Le Pen, and one-third abstaining. I think it has looked increasingly like that amount that would go to Le Pen is shrinking as captured by the polls, with perhaps more people looking to abstain. Now, of course, that's not something that is just static. That is not something that people have already necessarily made up their minds about. We know that people make up their minds quite late, often in presidential elections. They want to see the debate. They want to see how the candidates act on the campaign trail. And we saw Emmanuel Macron try to address that at his big meeting in Marseille on Saturday. And he really tried to use some of the words of those left-wing rivals from the first round in order, it would seem, to try and win round some of their voters. He, of course, echoed Jean-Luc Mélenchon by talking about that idea of a common future. And, of course, he played towards Mélenchon and, of course, Yannick Jadot of the Greens, and by talking more about this idea of about ecological transition, about ecological policies. He talked about the fact that he wanted France to be a great ecological nation, and talked about some specific policies about the transition from fossil fuels, with an eye on making sure that that was a managed process, of course, cognizant of what happened with the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest protests, about rapid fuel transitions and all the rest of it. And so he used one of the policies really of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, talked about appointing a minister for managing that ecological transition, as well as other things like insulating homes, massive tree planting campaign, and other ideas around things like air purity as well. So there's a real play, I think, from Macron to try and speak to voters on the centre-left to say, look, he hasn't been strong enough so far on ecological concerns, but that is a priority, that is something he wants to look at, and that is something he's actively listening to some of those left-wing rivals about. So there's been a play there to try and win round those voters. And that is really, I think, the hope from Macron's camp, that they can do enough to try and convince that he has heard those criticisms, he's heard those complaints, and he is now trying to accommodate more of that electorate into his grander plan for a second mandate.
And let's talk about Le Pen for a second. She has promised to ban the hijab, the Muslim head covering, in all public spaces. But she has been receiving a fair amount of fire for that pledge in recent days. Any signs she's reconsidering just days ahead of the vote on Sunday?
I think it's a tough one to say. It has been such a kind of centre point, really, of Le Pen's campaign. It's been such an idea that really pins some of her base. This is what fires up that extreme right electorate, which sees in the Rassemblement National a party willing to carry out some really extraordinarily xenophobic policies. There is a lot around these ideas. Of course, you mentioned her policy around the headscarf. I think there's also looking at the idea of, that idea of national preference, national privilege that she wants to kind of insert into the constitution. Now, that is what people have called a kind of constitutional coup, this idea of, a referendum carried out shortly after any election victory to reshape France's constitution. That would bring about all sorts of things, the xenophobic policies in terms of welfare, as well as ideas of really potential breaches of EU law, which would move France much closer to countries like Hungary and Poland. And some people have talked about amounting to a sort of soft Frexit, perhaps, as it looks like France would be sort of reneging on some of those wider commitments to Europe. So I think it would be surprising. Of course, we've seen before Marine Le Pen has flip-flopped on things like Frexit as a policy from last time round. That's something she shifted in terms of her campaign this time. And of course, there has been this effort to try and sort of banalise, to normalise, to make boring the idea of the Rassemblement National campaign, to shift away from these hot-button issues. So, of course, we know that she's flip-flopped before, but even as we see in that idea around a soft Frexit, perhaps, it means they're not really moving away from the issue itself. I think this is an issue that remains important to some of those really far-right xenophobic voters that form the base of the Rassemblement National. But it is something we could see the kind of language shift around, perhaps. And that's something I think will be interesting to see as we move into that debate on Wednesday.
And, keeping on this debate on Wednesday, a big debate. We've seen it before in the 2017 election. Marine Le Pen widely seen to have failed quite catastrophically. What would success look like for each candidate in Wednesday night's debate this year?
Well, it's an interesting one. Everyone talked about of course, you mentioned the debate in 2017 when Marine Le Pen sort of unwound, as it were. She came in, she seemed quite aggressive in terms of how she was putting her points across. And then when it came to the finer points of detail, she sort of faltered. She fluffed her notes. She wasn't quite on top of the figures. She had, of course, those big binders that she was flicking through, looking for it. And there was an element of kind of credibility and competence. And that was the real thing that I think stuck with the Rassemblement National. And that's what they've been trying to kind of address in the campaign this time round. And so I think there's actually, if we look at it, there's likely to be something of an inversion almost when we come into this debate tomorrow. I think we'll see Emmanuel Macron trying to be not the president, the kind of calm president, but something more of the fired up candidate. So I think we might see a little bit more fire from Macron. Whereas, of course, the Rassemblement National in this mode that they're trying to adopt with Marine Le Pen, I think will start to kind of calm down slightly and try to back off things and look much more like a sort of a party of government or an attempt to seem like that. So it could well be an interesting thing where they try and switch roles from the 2017 debate, I think. There'll be other issues which, of course, will be really important. We've seen, the debate is always a classic of French politics. From 74, 81, classic duels between Valéry Giscard d'Estaing and François Mitterrand. It's always something that kind of sets the tone for the entire election and provides those memorable moments. So I think it will be absolutely crucial. I think this debate, as in 2017, will help people make up their minds. And it's all going to be around this issue of credibility. Who is the credible candidate? Who can lead France? Who presents the opportunity for growth? Who presents the opportunity for a France which can protect its citizens and which can be a figure on the international stage? I think those are real priorities, and we are going to see a real grilling of those candidates. And I think it's going to be crucial for turnout in particular and really affect that abstention rate.
And you can watch that debate live here on France 24 tomorrow, Wednesday from 9 p.m. Paris time. Andrew Smith, thank you very much once again.
Thank you.